because really to me, this is about love. And this is about our society loving veterans in a way that makes them better off
Yeah.
instead of giving them things in a way that makes them worse off.
Welcome to the Mighty Oaks Show today. Glad to have you with us and looking forward to a great conversation. Before we jump into that conversation, though, I do want to thank you for joining us wherever it is you're listening from. If you're over at Mojo 50, thank you for being there. We love our audience at Mojo. You guys are great and appreciate all that is happening there and the support that we get there, of course. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, thank you for doing that. For both of you, take some time later, if you're not watching on YouTube, to go over to YouTube and you can find us there. We are on YouTube. Search for Mighty Oaks Programs. You search for us, you'll find our page, our channel. Subscribe, hit the notification bell there. That lets you know when content comes online. Sometimes people just subscribe, and that's great. That will show up in your feed of subscribed channels. However, when you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when new content comes online. This show is there, of course. A lot of other content that we're pushing out is there as well. I was just talking to someone this week about how to help a service member who's not necessarily interested in help. We have programs, of course, and we do a lot of things. One of the ways to help is by using the resources that we've provided. We've written books and blog posts and tons of other stuff that we've written. But on that YouTube channel, we have testimonial videos. We have videos that hopefully can provide encouragement and some direction. We've talked to a lot of experts in various areas related to trauma and military life and the transition away from military life. So a lot of stuff there. Please take some time to check out the YouTube channel. That would be awesome. If you'd like more information about Mighty Oaks, the Mighty Oaks Foundation, you can go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. All right, that's my introduction. If you're still listening, thank you for sticking through that. A lot of good stuff there as well. But we've got a great guest on today, and very excited to have him with us. Has recently written a book, and we're going to talk about that today in addition to talking about his service a little bit. Daniel Gade is with us. Daniel, thanks for joining us. We've been talking about this for almost a month, so we finally made it happen, and appreciate your time today.
I'm excited. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
So Daniel has served in the United States Army and outside of his service in the Army as an active duty soldier, has advocated for veterans' rights. And we're going to talk about some of that. Instead of me giving kind of the thumbnail, Daniel, why don't you just tell us where you came from, how you ended up in the Army, injured twice. On the other side of that, you continue to serve those who have served and are serving. Just tell us your story before we get into why you wrote this book and what you hope to accomplish from that.
Yeah, totally, 100%. So I was born and raised in Minot, North Dakota, which is actually, there's an Air Force base there, but I was not an Air Force kid. My dad had fought in Vietnam and been wounded. And actually, just the other day, my mom was showing me a family tree going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. And I had a relative killed in the Revolutionary War. I had a relative killed in the War of 1812. It sounds a little like the Forrest Gump story.
Wow.
But anyway, so my dad was wounded in Vietnam, and I was just raised in this family that was super patriotic and that just loved America. They loved God, they loved each other, and they loved America. And so my middle name is MacArthur, which tells you something about their goals for me, I think. My older brother's first name is Patton, and he also went in the Army.
Wow.
My little brother's first name is Christopher, and he also went in the Army, but didn't have to go to West Point like the rest of us. So I enlisted in the Army when I was 17 as a private in the Army Reserve and went to basic training to be a medic. And then a year later, I basically found out I'd gotten accepted to West Point, and so I went to West Point as a previously enlisted soldier, which about 15% of cadets are prior service, and so. Graduated from West Point in 1997 and into a world at peace. You know, the last great war had been fought. The, famous old story, the last great war was the one behind you. But
yeah.
Anyway, and thought that I would never have to go to war. And so when September 11th happened, I was actually at Ranger School as a captain in the Army. I went to Ranger School, and we thought it was part of the scenario. We thought it was part of the road to war scenario.
Right.
And I had orders to go to Korea at this time. So I finished my assignment. I finished Ranger School and graduated in November. And then in December, I was in Korea and I eventually got to command a tank company. So I was an armor officer. And when I was getting ready, I was actually in the last week of my company command when my boss and his boss came to me and they said, "Hey, Daniel, this is not a loyalty test, but we're sending your company to Iraq. This is summer of '04. We're sending your company to Iraq. Will you go with them?" And I literally quoted the book of Isaiah to them. I said, "Here am I, Lord, send me."
Sure.
And so they did. So in August '04, I ended up in Kuwait. And then in September '04, I ended up in Ramadi, Iraq. And we started taking casualties immediately. So my roommate, who was also my third platoon leader, was killed in action on September 14th, '04. By a sniper that hit him in a place where it was difficult to control the bleeding, and so we were unable to get the bleeding stopped. And then on November 10th, '04, I was in a firefight with my tank and a couple other tanks, and in a section of Ramadi that was sort of it was definitely a Marine sector, but these bad guys were shooting at us, and so we were shooting back at them, and we killed a couple of them, and then my tank was struck by a rocket propelled grenade, which sort of bounced off the top of the tank and partially decapitated and certainly killed instantly my loader, a wonderful soldier named Dennis Miller from LaSalle, Michigan. And I was wounded mildly, just some shrapnel in my face and arm. And then I had to get back to leading. I had to get back to being a commander. And so the next day I was out back in sector doing commander stuff. And then 2 months later, on January 10th, '05, I was hit by a roadside bomb. I was in my Humvee, and this pretty small roadside bomb, actually. The truck was fine. The truck drove back to the base camp. It didn't even have flat tires, but where the bomb was directly underneath me. And so I woke up on my back in the ditch, and my soldiers were treating me, and I tried to crawl off the stretcher, and they pushed me down, and they said, "Relax, sir, you're the only one." And I remember thinking, like, I'm the only one what, And then I was like, "Oh no, I've been wounded again." And but I lifted my head and I could see my body armor was all blown open. I could see my guts. I could see they were working on my legs. And I said, "Are my legs okay?" And they said, "Sir, you're going to be fine," which obviously means you're not going to be fine at all. It means you're probably going to die. That's soldier code for you're in real trouble. But they were able to call a helicopter, and by the grace of God, a helicopter was literally, at that time in Ramadi, it would normally take 45 minutes or an hour to get a medevac. And that day, it so happened that there was a soldier on my base camp who had appendicitis. And so they were doing an emergency medevac for him anyway. And when they got the call that they had an urgent surgical patient at my location, they swung the helicopter over and picked me up. And it was you'll be happy to know this is a Marine Corps CH-46. The only time I've ridden in
always
CH-46.
the Marines. Yeah,
always the Marines. And I remember thinking as the helicopter lifted off, I remember thinking, "Oh, thank God I'm saved." So they flew me to outside of Fallujah, a place called El Taqadum, and Navy doctors treated me, and I had run out of my type of blood completely because I was just gushing, and they gave me all the stored blood they had, and it wasn't enough. So they went to the mess hall and they took volunteers, and 25 sailors and Marines. 25 sailors and Marines came over and donated their fresh blood into bags to the IV pool, and it saved my life.
Yeah, wow.
And so I consider myself at least partially Marine and partially sailor. I chew on
I'm
crayons.
I'm glad you were able to recognize that Marines really are the heroes in any situation. So that's good.
In any story, Marines are definitely the heroes.
That's right.
So I had, they evacuated me to the States, and I had a skull fracture. I had kidney and liver failure. I had my entire abdomen was blown open. A week later, they amputated my right leg at the hip, so I'm a hip level amputee on the right side. And it's, I had a long road to recovery ahead of me. But my wife was awesome. She and I've been married now 22 years. At the time, we'd been married 5 years. And she came to me one day and she said, "Look, Daniel, while you're in the hospital, I'm going to be in charge of our family. Like, I got this, right? I'll do our taxes. I'll take care of our kid. We had a 2-year-old at the time. I'll do everything. Whatever you need me to do, I'm on it. But as soon as you're better, you're in charge of our family again. And just her saying that was super cool, because what it meant was that she was empowering me to thrive. And I think that's so critical in my recovery. That's a critical inflection in my recovery, is when she gave me not just a permission to thrive, but a requirement to thrive. So I end up in the hospital for like 5 months. I had like 45 surgeries or something like that. And then I was an outpatient for 6 months. And then I was able to continue on active duty, despite being a hip level amputee. Wow. I'd already been accepted to teach at West Point. And so the Army was like, yeah, sure, you can stay in. It doesn't matter if you limp a little, we're okay with that. So they sent me to get a master's degree. And then I got to go work at the White House doing veterans policy. And then I got to go back and get a PhD. Yeah. And then I taught at West Point for like 5 years until I retired in 2017. And, you know, I've done some really fun stuff. I've done Ironman triathlon with one leg. I've done all this great stuff. But I think the most important thing I've done is I've provided for my family, and I've thrived, and I've tried to be an example to others, which is kind of what this book is about.
So, man, so many great things there. What an incredible story. And the fact that you were able to continue to serve, after your injury and recover from that is amazing. I think, and you stopped and talked about this for a minute, but your wife saying, I'll take care of things while you're recovering, but I'm fully expecting for you to come home and recover your role in the home. This is something that we've talked about a lot. My wife and I have even spent a couple different podcast episodes talking about kind of the caregiver idea, or the idea that when a service member goes off to combat or goes off on a deployment, maybe even a non-combat deployment, the one who's left behind says, well, now I need to be mom and dad. I need to be, everything. It's mine now. And then there's a reintegration process that takes place. And if the idea is they left, so now this is all mine, that reintegration is extremely difficult.
Right.
But when someone says they're gone, and so, as the other half of this relationship, I'm going to manage things, but that doesn't change their role in the home. They're still the husband, or they're still the wife, as the case may be. Their role hasn't changed. I'm just managing this while they're away. We've often talked about how difficult not seeing that correctly can make the reintegration process. But when you're talking about an injury like yours, man, your wife's perspective, I can't imagine how helpful that was to you. Not only as motivation, but as you came back into the home. Because my guess is then, she's operating the home. Dad's coming home. We're gonna, he's not out of the picture. He's still the dad. He's still responsible for what happens here. Can you talk about that for a minute? Because I think that is critical to a lot of people who would listen to, a show like this.
Yeah, for sure. I think that for her, the responsibility to carry both burdens was something she was willing to do because she loves me and she values our relationship. But the setting down of that burden and me picking it back up, I think is a critical moment. And she was able to do that because she, I think, kept a pretty level perspective on the fact that this was temporary, that I was going to be okay eventually, and that this was not something she had to do forever. But I have to tell you, I really worry about the caregiver terminology, because what I think it does, men thrive. And this is all in the book, Wounding Warriors, but men thrive really on agency and on being strong and powerful and being recognized in their community as leaders and all that stuff. And so in those occasions where the wife gets put in a role as the caregiver for the husband, that puts the husband in the role of a child. And in some circumstances, like if somebody has a very serious brain injury or something where basically they're reduced to a childlike state of dependency, then maybe that's okay. But I really worry about, like, in cases of post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental illnesses, I worry about putting the wife in a role where she has to have the responsibility of being the parent to her own husband.
Right.
And where he has the ability, typically he, right? But where he has the ability to slip away from his responsibilities as a man. It's very worrisome to me. So anyway, we were able to avoid that because of the way that our, I don't have post-traumatic stress. I didn't have that kind of thing going on. I just had very, very serious physical injuries. And so that's a distinction that does
Yeah.
make a difference.
Well, it's important to acknowledge, though, that when you find yourself in a role that you weren't created to fulfill, that of dependent, it changes your ability to heal, your ability to lead, your ability to move forward. And I think, in our world, when we're helping spouses, often we have to deconstruct that caregiver identity. Giving care is important, but that doesn't mean that's who you are now. And I think a lot of spouses who fall into that, that's how they identify. And there's almost a thought that if my husband gets better, then I don't know who I am anymore. I've lost myself because that's my identity. And so I think acknowledging that I'm hurt and I need help, but I'm going to get better. I'm well and I'm helping my spouse who's hurt. These are things that we do, but it's not who we are. And when it becomes who we are, it completely undermines the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's right. And God created men to be providers and to be strong and have, the reason we're bigger and stronger and all that is because God has a specific role for us. And women are typically smaller and less strong because they have a very specific role too. And both are equally valuable in the eyes of God and in the eyes of society. But when the husband is reduced to the role of child, it just sets him up for all kinds of imbalance emotionally and relationally.
Yeah, that's right. Can you talk a little bit about faith, maybe your faith, but the role that faith played in your recovery and even in your family as you went through all of this?
Yeah, totally. My wife and I are Christians, and we were before I got blown up, and we have been. We've maintained our faith. I really believe that God has a plan for all of us, and that sometimes God's plan for you is a glorious one. I use the example of a big tapestry, and the tapestry is made of little tiny threads, and some people get assigned a gold thread, and some people get assigned a little black thread or a gray thread. But either way, no matter what thread color you're assigned by the creator, when you zoom back, the creator's plan comes into focus. So even though my life has been characterized to some degree, not in its ultimate summation or anything, but to some degree, my life has been characterized by some suffering, and that's bad. Yeah, I think it does contribute to God's plan for us. And so, when I got blown up, the right people were in the right places at the right time. Even non-Christian medical providers were saying, there's no medical reason for you to be alive. We don't understand what happened here. Why are you alive? I agree. There is no medical reason for me to be alive. I should be dead. But I'm not, because I think God has a plan for me. And that plan was manifested on January 10th, 2005, and subsequently for a couple of months of some pretty touch and go scariness.
Yeah.
And so that just increases our faith. But at the end of the day, you choose to believe or you choose not to. And, we choose to believe, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
That's great. Man, that's awesome. Let's get into the book, Wounding Warriors, How Bad Policy is Making Veterans Poorer and Sicker.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll let you take that. Tell us, what it's about, of course, but why you wrote it, and then what you hope to accomplish with it.
Yeah, so the book really originates in, I'd say, summer of 2005. So I'm in a wheelchair. I'm at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and I was focused, as I said earlier, on getting better because my wife had said, "You're going to get better, and you're going to,
right.
So you get better." But when I looked around, I saw a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines around me who weren't looking to get better. They were looking to get as much recognition for their wounds and their hurts as they could. And in this case, recognition meant monetary recognition. So there was this guy who was at Walter Reed when I got hurt. He had been hurt previously, like in 2003. I think he was hit and had a metal plate in his skull and stuff. He was functional. In 2005, when I was in the hospital, he was still there. And, he would go to the baseball games, he would go to the football games, he would get to hang out with the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders or whatever it was. And everybody would treat him as a hero. So I got better and went on about my life. And then in like 2007, I was back at Walter Reed doing peer visitation for some amputees. And this guy was still there, because what had happened was he had gotten trapped in the idea that he was in an identity that was fundamentally a negative identity. The identity of being a wounded warrior had taken over his life. And so I started mulling that over. And then I observed it in my master's program, and I observed it at the White House when I was working on veterans policy for President Bush. And then I observed it more in my PhD program, that what happens when you have bad policy is that a veteran who's on the edge, if you've got a distribution, right? You've got a guy who could go this way and get better, or a guy who can go this way and get worse. The current system that we have pays veterans to be sick. It pays them more the sicker they are.
Yeah.
And then it acts surprised when they adopt what the literature calls the sick role. So when they begin to behave in a way that is fundamentally a sick way, the system is responsible for having done that, because it takes people who are otherwise possibly productive members of society and puts them in this basket of dependent upon society for everything. So another a colorful example I give is that, when we all went in the military, before we went in the military, we were productive plows, right? We were in high school, we were in college, whatever we were doing. And we were taken out of society, and society heated us up and beat us and formed us into a sword, and then used that sword for our nation's purposes, whether it's killing bad guys or training or whatever it was. But when we get out, the current system is designed, almost explicitly designed, to never allow those swords to be reshaped into plows, and instead to just throw them in the corner and allow them to rust. And we see the evidence of rust around us constantly. Here are some examples. 22 suicides a day. That's an example, or more, by some estimates.
Sure.
That's an example of rust, because suicide is a disease of despair. Suicide is what happens when somebody has they don't see a path forward to be free of their pain, but for death.
Right.
But the system that we have right now puts people in that path by separating them from a valuable identity. Here's another way to think about it is, men especially, like last time you were on an airplane, which maybe because of COVID was a long time. I haven't been on a plane in ages. But when you're sitting down next to somebody on a plane, the first thing they say to you, if you're a man, is, if you're a woman, they say, how many kids do you have? Or are you married? If you're a man, they say, what do you do for a living?
Right.
Because our society defines men, and most men define themselves by what they do for a living. And so the VA's system of disability compensation pays a lot of people through a program called individual unemployability. It's kind of down in the weeds, but it pays people to separate from the labor market. And so then when you ask that guy, hey, what is it you do for a living? He looks at you and he says, well, I'm a disabled veteran. Well, that's not a positive identity. That's a negative identity.
Right.
It's looking at something that's bad. And so people begin to adopt that as their identity. And then they get paid extra to be unemployed or unemployable. And then we act surprised when they are at greater risk of suicide and addiction and malaise, and their children are sicker and their wives are sicker. And it's just bad for society and crushingly expensive.
Yes.
And so what I describe in the last chapter of the book, the epilogue, is a way of thinking about veterans that is more positive than that focuses on employment and empowerment and yes, compensating for wounds that are received in action, of course. But focusing on what veterans can do and can be and on thriving rather than on disability.
Okay, so
it's a lot. I know.
It's a lot. I think probably 100% of what you just said, I agree with, and I think there are a lot of people that don't agree with probably a lot of what you just said. But sure. I've long believed that two things that are happening in our society that are very harmful. One is The veteran community has become kind of a sacred cow in the United States.
That's right.
You cannot touch it, say anything about it, question it, give advice to it. And that's why people like you and like us and in our organization, we've had success, because we come from a position of experience and we can say, look, I get it. You served your country. Good job. We served our country as well. What we want to do is move forward together. And so we're able to have those conversations where a lot of people can't. And so that's been damaging, I think, to veterans. And the other thing, and you mentioned this, is financially incentivizing people to not get well. I can't tell you. You would know this because I'm sure you've had the same conversations, but the hundreds of conversations I've had with people where they'll say something like, if at my next evaluation with the VA, I'm showing improvement, I'll lose X number of dollars per month. And so I can't do that. And so they've learned how to game the system. They've been incentivized to stay broken, as you mentioned. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I'd love to get your perspective on this. I think a lot of the reason for that is coming out of the Vietnam War, a lot of the media communicated to us that we did it wrong. We did not appreciate our Vietnam veterans. We treated them poorly. We can never let that happen again. And so we need to incentivize, we need to pay, we need to do all the things that we're doing and provide the programs and so forth. It comes down to a compassion argument on one level. And so I think more often than not, the pushback to what you just said is, well, we should love these folks who have served for us. They've given so much. What is it that we would not give back to them? How do you address that, the compassion argument? The reason we're incentivizing them is because they deserve it or something, however that would be framed. What do you do with that?
Yeah, for sure. So I will use a very simple example. And I think we talked about this, I think you have kids too, right? You have a couple of kids? Okay, cool. So I have 3 kids. If my kids come to me and say, hey, Dad, do you love me? Of course I love you. Obviously I love you, right? And then they say, well, if you love me, give me a candy bar. Right. Well, what are you talking about? It's 10 o'clock in the morning. We're not having candy at 10 o'clock in the morning. That's ridiculous. Have an apple if you're hungry.
Right.
If they were to then say, well, you must not love me if you don't give me exactly what I want, my answer to them is, I'm not giving you what you want because I love you.
Right.
Because there's a better way to raise you and to help you thrive than just giving you candy at 10 a.m. Right? And so for veterans, what I say to that is, which is more compassionate? Paying a guy to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and drink whiskey and play video games, or to allow him to put systems in place to stand him up on his feet, or wheelchair, if that's what is involved, where he can be proud of himself, where he can, and she obviously too, where that veteran can thrive, right, where that veteran can provide for his family, can be a valued member of society, can be viewed by society as somebody who is worthy of respect. To me, that thriving should be the goal. And the route to that thriving is not through increased disability benefits. Even though that might feel good to give somebody something, it's not the right answer. The right answer is to put systems and processes in place that put them in a place of thriving.
Yeah.
So the compassion argument, I mean, which is more compassionate, to give a homeless guy a bottle of booze because that's what he wants, or to put in place a system by which he can be housed and fed and eventually a member of society again? I think that's obviously, in the long run, the more compassionate approach.
Yeah, that's good. It's funny because I think not only in the military community, but just in American culture, this idea that I'm owed something, that people need to give me something, that if you love someone, you provide everything they want, whether it's a cell phone or, video game system or free housing or whatever. So we've got both of these things, and they've been conflated, and so it's an uphill battle. But you're absolutely right. The best thing we can give to someone is self-worth and value and a good identity that allows them to lead a productive life. And be a valued member of society. And I
Yeah.
think, man, we're really struggling with that in the veteran community. That's one of the things we talk about all of the time. 22 million veterans in the United States, roughly. 2.5 million active duty service members. And we're in a country screaming for leadership.
Yeah.
And yet we have, 23, 24 million individuals who have been taught in the best leadership schools in the world how to lead, and yet they're not.
Yeah. What I would say is, it's really funny actually, because this book is not a political book per se. It's not about Republicans or Democrats.
Right. Sure.
Because I think that both Republicans and Democrats, the political left and the political right, are idiots on this question. And here's why. Because the political left, I'll start with them because I'm not one of them, but the political left believes that anybody who ever served in uniform is basically a victim of a patriarchal system that's building empires overseas, and anything that's wrong with them makes them into permanent victim class, and that by giving them stuff, they can be co-opted into being voters for that side. And so therefore, they deserve everything. They're victims of this evil system, and so they deserve everything. The political right says they deserve everything, but only because the political right has idolized the uniform, so that anybody who ever serves in uniform is a hero, regardless of whether they were, stabbing prisoners to death, or killing non-combatants, or whether they were legit, Medal of Honor recipient type heroes, right? So the political right says anybody who ever looked at a uniform is a hero, and so they deserve everything. And so the system has arrived at veterans deserve everything, without ever stopping to consider that by giving veterans everything, we are in fact providing fuel to the suicide crisis, which we were talking about a moment ago.
So the problem is the same, but it's just being approached from two different places. Perhaps on the left, it's intentionally, the incentives are intentionally being used to institutionalize veterans, or to bring them into that political left. That's where they are able to get the things that they need. The right's doing the same thing, but for a different reason. So we have a problem. What is the solution? You used the example of homelessness before, and I think one of the problems with homelessness is the solution is not super clear, because if people don't want to move on, if people don't want to get jobs, if people don't want to, then what do you do? At what point do we go, well, we've done everything we can for you, it's time for you to figure it out on your own? What is the answer for the veteran community on this?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, famously, and it's in the, opening credits of the book, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think that the system right now is stacked in a way that military people are still asking what they can do for their country, but then as soon as they get out, the system is waiting to catch them and say, what can your country do for you? And so I think for each veteran, it's incumbent on us as veterans to say, sure, if you have a disability, fine, file for it. I'm not saying don't do that.
Right.
I'm saying recognize that it's not morally neutral to do so. I have something that I call the 10 citizen test, and it's a thought experiment. I'm not proposing it as policy or anything, but the 10 citizen test is simply this. If you have filed for disability and you've got 10 conditions, let's say, or 12 conditions, if you can walk up to 10 random citizens and say to those citizens, hey, I'm a disabled veteran, and they say, thank you for your service, you say, listen, I want to tell you what my 12 conditions are. And you can list those from 1 to 12, and you can do it without embarrassment. Well, then probably those are legit,
Yeah.
If it would embarrass you to say, these are my 12 conditions, then maybe those 12 aren't all legit. Sure. So when I left the Army, and when I retired from the Army in 2017, with a hip level amputation, a bunch of scarring, and just I'm a mess, right? So I was willing to apply for those things because those are combat caused disabilities. But then when the VA guy was like, listen, what about your brain injury? I said, well, I don't have a brain injury. He said, well, you had a skull fracture, right? And I said, I did. And he said, well, and you were unconscious for 3 weeks. I was. And he said, well, what about your brain injury? And I go, I don't have a brain injury. I have, I've gotten a master's and a PhD. I've taught college for 6 years. Like, I'm fine. And he goes, listen, man, let me be clear with you. If you say you have a brain injury, I can defend it and I can get you paid extra. Why don't you want the free money? And my point to him was, it's not free money.
Yeah.
Somebody worked really hard for that money. And the government took it, yeah, but it's not my money.
Sure.
And so I was willing to apply for things that were combat caused, but I wasn't willing to stretch the truth.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of veterans who are willing to stretch the truth. So for example, in the book, a VA claims examiner is like, yeah, everybody who comes in says they have tinnitus, ringing in the ears. Why do they say it? Well, because there's no test for it. If you say you have tinnitus and it wakes you up at night, the VA can't test for it. And so they're just going to give you 10% disability for it, regardless of whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
And so the system is set up to be gamed, and they pay you if you game it, and they're willing to say, yeah, you don't even need to seek treatment for it. And so part of it is on veterans, just as a moral responsibility of each one of us.
Right.
And I think, like, I do eat meat, I hunt, I eat meat, I even eat meat from the grocery store. But I recognize that eating meat is not morally neutral, right? In order to eat a piece of meat, you have to be willing to take the life of an animal.
Sure.
Taking disability payments is not morally neutral either. And so it's on us to weigh whether we are willing to do that. And right now, there's this stampede of people who are saying, hey, I'm doing it, you should do it too.
Right. And
they drag you along down the disability pathway. So part one is veterans have to be morally responsible on their own and decide whether they're willing to partake of that broken system.
That's good.
Part two, though, is a little different. And that is, we as a society need to rethink the way that the system is designed so that the system encourages the outcomes that we want and discourages the outcomes we don't want. So, for example, instead of labeling somebody disabled, permanently and totally disabled, you've heard that term 1,000 times, for life, first we got to say, well, first, let's get you fully rehabilitated before we label you permanently and totally disabled. Maybe at the end of rehabilitation, you'll be truly permanently and totally disabled, but unless, like, you're missing a big chunk of your brain, you're not permanent and totally disabled. You are, with the proper aids and supports and everything, you're capable of having a life that you can be proud of still, Christopher Reeve, despite being a high-level, trach-dependent quadriplegic, had a life that he could be proud of after he got hurt, because he chose that life, you know? So I think the system ought to have services and supports in it that direct veterans or that guide veterans into the right pathways. And then there's some, like, sort of ticky-tack stuff that we could do. Like, for example, a lot of veterans go in and they say, hey, I need to apply for disability for my back. It doesn't hurt me all the time, but I really would like to get the back treatment I need, or, back surgery. And so I'm going to have to apply for disability so that I get access to the healthcare system. I think we ought to have things that I call it in the book, I call it treatment only conditions, right? Because there's a lot of things that people file for as disabilities that aren't disabilities at all. They're just conditions of life. If you have hearing loss at age 60, that's not a disability, dude. It's just part of living in a broken and fallen world, right?
Right, sure.
If you have sleep apnea and the VA prescribes you a CPAP machine, that's a 50% disability, right? A bigger disability than losing a leg below the knee.
Wow.
That's how big of a disability that is in the VA system.
Wow.
But in reality, that's not a disability at all. Like 20% of Americans have sleep apnea, and it's primarily tied to obesity and small neck circumference, right? So maybe the VA should treat those people. Yes, give them a CPAP if they need a CPAP. Give them the back surgery if they need it. But don't pretend as though the treatment is totally without effect and therefore results in permanent and long-term disability.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of practical solutions, and it just is going to at some point require someone to have the will to do some things that will be unpopular, and to begin reforming a system that I think has good intentions generally, but is doing so much damage to veterans and their families.
It really is, and that's why I said sicker and poorer. Sicker because veterans are encouraged to really embrace their illness. I mean, you guys at Mighty Oaks are doing a great job with guys, helping them see through faith and through practical action steps, seeing ways to get through their time of trial and into a life they can be proud of. I mean, the founder, right, has had a pretty cool life journey in that regard. But the VA system pays people more the sicker they can show themselves to be, and if they can avoid getting better, they can continue to get paid. It's just insanity. So that's why they're sicker, and they're poorer because if let's say you have a 100% disability, that's about $3,000 a month, right? Let's say that you can get better to where you're actually able to hold down a job, and maybe your disability payment goes from $3,000 to $1,500. But now you've got a full-time job, and let's say it's a middle-of-the-road full-time job that pays the median wage in America, which is about $4,000 a month. Now you take the $1,500, you add $4,000 to it, and now you're at $5,500. So you're $2,500 better off than you were just on disability. And so the system makes veterans poorer by trapping them in an unimproved condition, as General Mattis said in his review of the book.
What do you, other than providing information, what do you hope to gain from you getting this book out there? Because certainly it swims upstream of a lot of what people are saying right now about veteran care.
Yeah, that's right. What I want to do, and by the way, we've got, this book has the endorsement of 2 former VA secretaries, a former deputy secretary, a former secretary of defense, some Medal of Honor recipients. All those reviews are available on woundingwarriors.com. You can read the reviews. So a bunch of people who are serious heavy hitters have said, holy cow, this is a totally necessary book, and I'm glad you wrote it. What I hope to accomplish is to change the narrative. What we need to do with our veterans, what we ought to do with our veterans is when they get out of the service, we ought to be viewing them as productive members of society in the long run, and not just as a broken toys that we don't understand, And so somebody with my particular profile, right? So I have, 2 Purple Hearts, I have 1 leg, I've got a PhD in policy, I've worked at the White House on veterans policy, but I've also lived inside this mangled, maimed body for 15, 17 years now. I hope that I have the credibility to carry this argument forward in a way that causes people to say, well, wait a second, maybe this guy's legit, and he's not just, maybe he's telling us something we need to hear. And by the way, when I talk to, members of Congress behind closed doors, they're all like, you're totally right. Yes, exactly right. Thank you for being courageous enough to say this stuff. So people know that what I'm saying is true. And that I'm for veterans and not against them.
Right.
But it is complex to make this argument. I'm glad we get to do it in this sort of long form and not in sound bites. Because really to me, this is about love. And this is about our society loving veterans in a way that makes them better off instead of giving them things in a way that makes them worse off.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Is your audience the wounded service member, or did you write to the person who can influence policy?
Well, a little of both, actually. So if you think about a book like Hillbilly Elegy, which you probably heard of and probably read, actually, that exposed the plight of people in Appalachia, but as a policy book, but in a readable way. We think of this as kind of sort of the Hillbilly Elegy of veterans policy, where it's told through the eyes of 2 guys, Matt and Jeff. They enlist in the infantry together, they serve in Afghanistan together, and then one of them gets out and pursues sort of higher education. They both get married as soon as they get out, but they pursue higher education. One of them pursues higher education and thriving, and the other one goes in the disability system and is sort of chasing that. And so you're seeing it through their eyes. but you're also through the accounts of dozens and dozens of interviewers, claims examiners, physicians, physical therapists, military people, wives, children, all of it. Actually, no children. We didn't interview children for it, but through the eyes of all these people, that main story is illuminated, which is that the policies that we put in place to help veterans are actually having a negative effect.
Yeah. Awesome.
So really, I would love this to be the sort of book that that causes America. This isn't for veterans necessarily. It's not for policymakers. It's for every kitchen table in America to say, if I love veterans, what should I do? And the answer is, you should advocate for systems that treat those veterans with respect and not the disrespect that the current system does.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great statement. You treat veterans with respect, and giving them free stuff, although that can be helpful on one hand, is not necessarily treating them with respect as individuals who can contribute to society in a very positive way.
Right, exactly.
Where can people find this? It is being released soon. Pre-order is available now. Talk about what that looks like and where they can find this.
Yeah, totally. So it's available on woundingwarriors.com. You'll immediately recognize it. Woundingwarriors.com. It's got my picture. I'm on top of a tank on the thing, and the pre-order button is right there. And for your listeners on here, I want to offer, I can give you a $2 discount. And if you just enter the code WARRIORS at checkout,
awesome.
Then everybody who's listening to this and orders with the code WARRIORS gets a $2 discount. And I will make a donation to the Mighty Oaks Foundation in conjunction with that. So please blast this out to everybody. It's also available on Amazon, but if you buy it through Amazon, what happens is Jeff Bezos keeps all the profits, and I can't donate any of it. But what I will say is that if you're the sort of person who likes an audiobook, because you just can't really sit down and read a paper book, the audiobook is going to be available on Amazon soon. And I narrated it, so you get to actually hear my own voice narrating it. So that was actually pretty fun.
Yeah. Fantastic. Daniel Gade, the book is Wounding Warriors, How Bad Policy is Making Veterans Poorer and Sicker. And you can find that on woundingwarriors.com. Again, use that word warriors when you are ordering, and push this out to everyone that you know. This is the kind of book that even your civilian friends need to read, and probably more than a lot of other books that we would talk about on this show. Those who care about veterans, and a lot of people care about veterans. In fact, in the work that we do, I have found 99% of the people that I come in contact with respect and appreciate veterans. They don't always know what to do with veterans, but they respect and appreciate them. And hopefully a book like this can help give some perspective on that. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Daniel, for all of that. Man, appreciate the work that you do, and look forward to reading the book.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate it. And there's some good war stories in there. You're going to love it. Chapter 3 is my friend Tyson when he steps on a bomb in Afghanistan. From his perspective, it's pretty kind of dark. So definitely read that and then hear the rest of Tyson's story later in the book. So happy to do it, and happy to be a part of the Mighty Oaks Foundation team. You guys are doing fantastic work, and when you open up your ranch to elk hunting, call me. I'd love to come shoot an elk.
We'll let you know. Man, awesome. Daniel Gade, the book again, Wounding Warriors. And for those of you that are listening, make sure that you go over and watch later on. You can find this episode and a lot of other content on YouTube. Go to YouTube, look for Mighty Oaks Programs. You'll find us there. And subscribe, hit the notification bell. That would be awesome. Take some time to go over and check out the website, woundingwarriors.com. If you have any questions, if you'd like to connect with us, please check us out at mightyoaksprograms.org. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We will talk to you next time.